All righty. Welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am so excited for our guest today. This is a topic that is, first of all, near and dear to my heart, but I think a lot closer to all of us than it was before the pandemic. You'll understand why when I introduce Amber here in just a second. But Amber was introduced to me through my friend Julie, who helps place people on podcasts. And I'm a fan of Julie. So anybody that Julie sends me when she tells me they're going to be a fit, I'm like, yes. But Amber, I loved reading about Amber's work and getting to know her through her online presence. If you don't know Amber Hawley is a licensed therapist, multiple business owner, and former tech industry dropout who works with high achieving, easily distracted entrepreneurs with mindset and strategies to stop suffering for success. As host of the Easily Distracted Entrepreneur podcast, she supports ADHD and ADHD-ish business owners who live in Distraction City to overcome shiny object syndrome. Oh my gosh. And Amber's on the East Coast, so she's with us in her evening hours. I'm like nearing the end of my day. But Amber, thank you for joining me. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I feel like the way you read that, I was like, I sound impressive. Like I need you to read that for me more often, I think.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. I could turn on my Canadian accent for you.
I know. I do. I understand why people say that to you now.
Hilarious. No, but on the topic of ADHD, right? And we were chatting actually right before we went live. I've got a son with ADHD. I, have other people in my life with ADHD. I feel like I have ADHD now, whether I do or not. It's the struggle for me of COVID is, like so many parents of little people, trying to work essentially a full-time job and parent two children full-time and be their teacher and do all the other things that, keep a household and a life going. And there were what did they call it? The context switching. There was so much context switching throughout, the last 18 months, 20 months, whatever, 189 months. It's been so many months that I would literally get to the end of my days feeling like my brain was scrambled eggs. And I've said this more than once on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like it caused so much dysfunction for me internally and energetically. So it's a really important topic. I think a lot of people, whether they are impacted directly, whether they know somebody with ADHD, but for sure, entrepreneurs that are in the boat of dealing with ADHD or feeling like they have ADHD because of the nature of entrepreneurship, right? There's like layers on layers on layers. So welcome. We're here for it all, Amber.
Bring it. I know. The thing is, I say like I help people, as being a therapist as well. It's like I help with the emotional side of business. And here's the thing. Modern entrepreneurship, I think, already leads us towards a place of constantly being distracted. There's so much being thrown at us and having to keep our attention and take care of all the things, but like you said, having the pandemic happen and all of our normal norms went out the window. Most people are feeling that, whether or not they're actually ADHD. And that's why I say ADHD-ish, because in my experience, a lot of people who actually have ADHD don't know it, or they're in that place where they're like, I just feel so scattered. I feel like it's so hard to focus. I feel it's just hard to get the things done that are important to me, and which I think is, again, a symptom of modern entrepreneurship. So, I'm working with people where I've even had people come into my membership that's, for ADHD-ish people. And they say, I 100% do not have ADHD, but I need some accountability and support because I am going crazy.
Right. Well,
so you're not alone.
Totally. And, even one of the things that I speak on, because I live on the legal side of the equation, right? And I'm an attorney. I help people with the legal side of their business, but I'm here for all of the parts of the entrepreneurship journey. And I just am enamored generally with entrepreneurs, with what it takes to build a thriving business, with what it takes to create a successful business and a successful life, and just really love supporting people with mindset, with endurance, with, bringing fabulous guests on like yourself that can speak to specific strategies. But one of the things I teach is that like legal, when somebody signs up to start a business or launch something on their own, they're not necessarily thinking of the fact that they have to learn ABC, XYZ, right?
Yes.
They're a technician. They want to do a very specific thing in the world. They just want to serve people. Usually they just want to serve the heck out of people. And instead, what they end up having to do is learn marketing and sales and information technology and business systems and legal, like all this stuff that applies to their particular business. And that's what I'm talking about, where you layer on and, like you were mentioning, whether you're ADHD or not, that path of entrepreneurship can bring so much with it that you end up feeling that way because it's so many balls in the air, so many things to juggle, right? Categories as well as functions, just the day-to-day tasks of what it takes to really build even a small business and do that well.
Exactly. And I think, like you're saying, those are really specified skill sets. Like when you think about legal or finance or marketing or sales or social media, I mean, anything we can outsource or hire people to do, of course, but it's all of those pieces. And we expect ourselves to be able to catch everything and do it well. And we're supposed to bootstrap it and, like be on top of everything. And it's just not realistic. And, it's especially hard, I think, in the beginning. Sometimes it's okay because you might not even know what you don't know. Like you might not even realize, oh, I'm supposed to take care of that or do this thing, or, you find out about it later. But then you get to that point where as you're growing your business, I think that's when you're like, okay, now I need to actually start outsourcing and investing in other people because it's not realistic. If you think about that classic book, E-Myth Revisited, where he talks about, he talks about technicians, because I heard you said that.
Totally. It's totally Michael Gerber speak, right?
I know, exactly. Exactly, which I love. And it's such a great book because it really talks about that core struggle of, working on your business versus in your business. And so you eventually have to kind of be in that outside place where you're working on it instead of in it as the technician. But then even then people think, well, now I'm not being the technician, but somehow I must, be a lawyer and a CPA and, all the things. Right. And it's like, no, it's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible. You have to know enough to be able to at least, within a reasonable range, assess your needs so that you're strategic in what you're hiring for. Because I think the other mistake that people make is just wanting to offload portions of their business that they really need to lead. Like you have to lead your business and you have to lead different segments and portions of your business. And you can't do that without information, without knowledge, without understanding it well enough to lead it, even if you're not doing it yourself, right? So for example,
that's such a good point. Yeah.
Like information technology, right? Tech, how many people just would rather not deal with tech at all, but have had the horrendous of experience of hiring it out and, paying somebody quite a bit of money only to have that totally go sideways or wrong or not be the thing at all that they thought it was going to be. So it's, and I think there's lots of examples of that across, multiple areas of business, but it's the thing about you have to know enough to know how to hire for and lead that section of your business, even if you're not doing it yourself.
Yeah. And I think, that's the part that makes it manageable. I agree. In order to vet people properly, you really do need some insight or some basic understanding. Cause I've seen that where people just get raked over the coals and like completely overcharged for something. And like you said, it might not even been the best thing for them, or they didn't do what they were supposed to. And so that's the hard piece. And then the feeling of that overwhelm of, well, I've got to know more, and finding that boundary of where's the line of educating myself enough, but then not having to feel like I have to be so immersed in it to make decisions. I think that's the hard balance to, that line to walk. Right.
Yeah. Well, And in this space, and you can talk to us a little bit, I'm curious, specifically what kinds of entrepreneurs you serve. I imagine our worlds overlap quite a bit. I mostly the folks that listen to this podcast are probably going to be in what I call the information entrepreneur space: coaches, consultants, online educators, speakers, authors. They're primarily building service-based businesses around bodies of information and bodies of work that they've created, right?
Yeah. And I would say that's a majority of my clients as well. Like I do have some people that have done like products, some product stuff or like books or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, it's in that service industry. And yeah, so working with those people, I work with both men and women, but I think speaking to a lot of women, especially as a mom and somebody who has multiple businesses, I think there's a lot of like understanding and working with that.
Yeah. Well, and it's an, for anybody that is in the small business category, and especially information entrepreneurs, if they're starting off as solos, they might build up to small teams. Most of the folks that I support are building what I call lifestyle businesses. They're not trying to create the next Google. They're not going to create even a startup where they're going to spin it off and try to make 50 or $100 million in 5 years or whatever, right? Those tend not to be the folks that I'm talking to. And and the challenge of being a small entrepreneur or being a solo and trying to build a small business that affords you an avenue to essentially fulfill your mission and your purpose in the world through your work, right? Because a lot of people that I serve, I categorize as very mission-driven, conscientious entrepreneurs, is that you have to keep learning. Like you don't have an in-house team to handle all of this for you. And so from a business leadership perspective, you do have an uphill battle in that you have to learn what you need really quickly in order to grow and scale at a pace that makes your business sustainable. And that's where the danger of like offloading our decision making onto, quote unquote, an expert or a guru or somebody else who's like, oh, here's how you should do it. I'm always really clear with my clients, even when they go to hire other professional services, like, you are the one that needs to decide very clearly where this fits for you. Like you cannot expect other people to make that decision for your business. You can get guidance on it, but you ultimately have to be responsible for that decision. So anyways, back to the point and why you are here to talk to us today. The struggle is real. This challenge of having to do so much as entrepreneurs, in our work, and particularly those that do have ADHD. I'm really curious about your roots. Obviously, you're a therapist. So talk to me about how you got started in the therapy world. What drew you in that direction?
Yeah, I think, it was funny growing up. I remember like thinking, I either want to be a lawyer or a psychologist. And it was these two things, because there's part of me that I loved learning, and I love like figuring out how people work and, going through that process. So I was kind of in those two places. And then, like many people, it was like, and then I started doing other things. I actually ended up moving to California from Minnesota when I was 21. And then I started working in marketing. So I had done previously like different things, retail and nannying and all that kind of stuff. But I went into marketing and did really well there and kind of grew and kept getting promotions or different things. And so then I did like marketing operations, internet operations and marketing. And I just like naturally technology came to me. So I just did really well. But I remember, and I jokingly say, I had my existential crisis, like most 26-year-olds do, where I was like, what is the point of my work? And, this was after, it was kind of the heyday of the .com, but we'd already gone through one little like tiny crash. And so, I was just like, if at the end of the day, like if the world ended, what is the meaning of my work? And so I just was in this place. So then I started, I went to therapy myself and started going through that process and realized like, yeah, this is what it is. Cause I felt I felt like I was like, I hate people. I can't stand them. They make me crazy. And it was like, no, I don't actually hate people. I hated working in corporate with all of this, like all these directors. It felt like there were 100 million directors, and just feeling like I had these people who didn't know what they were doing, telling me what to do. And I couldn't handle that. I am a little bit of a Virgo type A. So I was like, this is crap. And I realized I like connecting with people one-on-one. It wasn't, I don't hate people. I do love people, but I just wanted to connect with people one-on-one. And frankly, everyone has always told me their life story. I can be at a gas pump and people tell me that. So it's like, well, duh, I should go into business, or I mean, I should make this my life's work and connect with people. And then the funny thing is, after I became a therapist and started my private practice, and then started it as a group practice. So I hired other therapists to work for me and running all of that. It was like I went back to my roots in a way. So it was like this full circle of, then I started loving like talking about marketing and business and growth and technology. And so it's like I got to marry both of the worlds. So that's when I started, my online business and the podcast. And I was like, oh, I get to do the thing that I love and connect with people and support people and talk about business and marketing. Like, what's better than that?
I love it. Where does your love of business and marketing come from?
I think I think a little bit, I did love that when I started in the .com world, because I love learning new technology. I loved learning things. I wouldn't say like I love being on the cutting edge, because sometimes I can be a little curmudgeon-y, but I, I'm like, oh, let's kick it old school. Like it doesn't need to be, I'm not all about the new, but I think it was just that idea of these are opportunities for us to connect to people and to grow our businesses and have this lifestyle that you want. Like you said, the lifestyle entrepreneurship thing, and do it, talking about something that I have a passion about. I don't know, I just found, because my group practice is in Silicon Valley. So I was seeing a lot of like professionals, like, C-suite execs, lawyers, doctors, but also a lot of entrepreneurs and like CEO startup people as in my therapy practice. And I only worked with individual adults and couples. That was my specialty. And that's where I started like seeing a lot of ADHD. And then I didn't get diagnosed until I was 41 with ADHD. I didn't realize that was what was going on. And this happens to a lot of people, especially women, because like the way our ADHD shows up, it doesn't interrupt or disrupt school. Yeah. Yes. So we tend not to get noticed until later. And especially if you're someone like me, like my type of ADHD is considered overfocused. So I had great coping mechanisms to make sure that I minimally dropped balls. I mean, I still did, don't get me wrong, and then eventually though, as your bandwidth shrinks, like those coping mechanisms just don't work anymore. Right. And then I married somebody with ADHD, and now we have 2 ADHD kids. My third, I just don't know yet. So I have 3 kids, but I'm like the first 2 for sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, once you start looking, I feel like it's everywhere. My husband is definitely in the ADHD camp. My son has ADHD. Now I'm wondering about myself. You said overfocused, and I'm like, ding, ding, ding. I can really like last part of, COVID and the 18 months that I talked about being so miserable, this forced context switching, just like, oh my gosh, I have no words, and the words that I do have for it are really bad words. But the struggle for me is I can focus really intensely to the point where my husband's like, we're talking to you and you don't even know we're here, or you're responding and you don't even know you're responding. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds bad. And I apparently have done that quite a few times to my family and kids, and it's like a joke. So I've wondered, and I think partly being in a household with other ADHD, like with a son, and there's part of me that's like, oh my gosh, whether I want to or not, I'm now ADHD. How for adults that are like, am I, aren't I? Like what? Tell us a little bit, if you're willing to share, like about your own journey figuring out at age 41, because I think there's quite a few people in that camp. I mean, I'm in my mid 40s. I think a lot of kids went undiagnosed with things that they know a lot more about these days. And, and there's a lot more support in place for certain things for children these days. It's still not always easy to get it and find it, but it is there. And, but I think a lot of folks are in the camp of finding out only in their, 30s or 40s or adult life about certain things.
Yeah, exactly. And, I will say what we see in like the therapy world is, maybe a parent brings in their kid to therapy because they've been identified by the school. Right. And then their kid gets diagnosed and then they start going, like I do that too. Like there's these common behaviors that you start to see. Right. So there's that, and that does happen. Or in my case, I was going through a terrible bout of burnout. My son had a terrible accident. He is fine, but he had a terrible, terrible drowning accident. And after that, my bandwidth was just so low, and I just felt like I wasn't functioning, it was becoming so stressful because I couldn't function at the same level. Like the things I used to be able to do and rally for, I just couldn't do it. And I let, huge things drop, and I'm the primary breadwinner. So I needed to make, and living in California, financially, there was a lot of stress and expectation there. So it was really hard. But I do want to caveat to say, sometimes though, again, when our kids were, home, actually trying to school from home, everyone feels ADHD because that is not the optimum way for us to function as human beings. So it may not be an ADHD thing. It might just be that you were living in chaos and, all of this stuff and it's so hard because if you're trying to focus and you're constantly being interrupted, it's going to look like you can't get anything done. Right. That's just part of it. But to going back to kind of my story. So it was really funny because I had started seeing my therapist again because after my son's accident. And I remember I was talking to her, and actually it was my girlfriend too. So my girlfriend that I had met, she started going to couples therapy and found out that she had ADHD and then told me. So then I mentioned it to my therapist, who's like, I actually think you might have it. So then I go to my friends at a networking, because it was all therapists, right? We knew each other really well. We met every month for lunch and we knew each other really well. And I mentioned it and they all go, duh. And I'm like, why the heck didn't you tell me? I know, I was all these years, I kept seeing all these things and I thought they were negative personality traits. I saw it in a very negative way. And it was causing all of this pain and disruption in my life. And I say that understanding I was also very successful. So it's I'm very type A, I'm go, Gen Xer. So, that whole work till you die thing and make your life miserable. But it was, so I have all that going, but then I would do these things where I'd be like, what is wrong with me? And I made it so painful and I just couldn't figure out why can't, and this is something I hear a lot of people say, a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people I've worked with, where they're like, if I just did it better, and they may say it in different words, but if I just did it better, then I wouldn't let this ball drop, or I would have been able to catch this, or I wouldn't have made that mistake. And it's no, when you understand your brain works differently. So it's not about doing it better. It's about understanding how your brain works and then adjusting how you approach things, your expectations, all of that. And, it is estimated that 40% of entrepreneurs likely have ADHD. And it's 40%. No surprise to me. It's no surprise. One, there's a lot of traits. There's a lot of positives to having ADHD, right? We can be risk takers. We're very creative. We think outside the box. And like you said, the hyper focusing.
The hyper focus is through the roof. My son, if he's interested in something, he can triple down. He will be more focused than anybody else, and he will learn it faster than anybody else until he's got it mastered. Right.
Exactly. And I think that going back to, when you asked about my story, being in the marketing world, I remember interviewing for this position and I lied. I said I could do something that I'd never done, but by the time I had to do it, I knew it and I did it. Right. And it's that thing where you can learn so fast. It's just so there are positives, right? And oh my God, the hyper focusing, that is my saving grace though. There are times where I can get so much done in that period of time because I'm so focused. And it makes up for those times when I'm like, I can't focus and I don't want to work, you know? But now I've done the ADHD classic thing where I just forgot what I was talking about.
No, that's okay. I'm going to insert a question here.
Yeah.
When people are struggling with ADHD or ADHD-ish symptoms, do they describe it? So for folks listening, would it be described like you just feel like you're dropping balls, right? I heard you say that a couple of times. Like, is it just that you can't hold it all together? Things are slipping. Like how do you help people relate to, understanding whether or not they might be in that camp? And maybe they already know if they are, but I think there are a lot of people who may be struggling and may not know that it could be related to ADHD, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, so sometimes, and I just have to say this because I've had so many clients say this. If you were diagnosed as a kid, you still have it. You don't outgrow ADHD. So I'm just going to put that out there for anybody who's questioning it.
I'm going to make my husband listen to this episode. I know everybody who knows my husband. Yeah. I'm laughing because he'll act like, oh, no, that's not a problem for me now. And I'm like,
no, it is. And, and it does tend, there is a hereditary component. So you do tend to see it in families. Like after getting diagnosed, I looked at like stuff my mom did. I was like, oh yes, totally. Like, now I see it. Right. But going back to, the only thing we tend to grow out of, by the way, is the hyperactivity. Although when you meet, and I swear, you see that more in men, but I'm combined type. So I have both. But when you meet somebody who's like 40 and they're like running, like they have a motor on them, you're like, oh yeah, like you must have been crazy as a child, like on fire,
This is going to be my son, just FYI.
Yes, I know, bless them though. They're so awesome. So yeah, going back to that, things that I kind of hear, like common things I hear is like, and things that I've been guilty of saying. Is like, oh, I was doing so good. And then all of a sudden, it's like they hit a wall or something happened. There was some little bit of pushback on something. And then they completely drop the ball and forget about it. Or they just feel like, oh, I meant to do that and I didn't. And then it has this like trickle down crappy effect, right? Like of things that went wrong because they weren't on top of something. Right. So yeah, dropping balls or feeling like it's like this sprint and then you hit a wall and sprint and hit a wall, like that kind of dynamic.
So even this concept of burnout. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you're going to see, especially when somebody has ADHD and it's impacting them, you also will see a lot of anxiety. Now, it could just be anxiety. Anxiety causes a lot of havoc, just like burnout causes a lot of havoc in people's lives. But you will see people like have anxiety because they're overly stressed about something, where I see people like they get really perfectionistic because they've either been so criticized in the past for mistakes, or they get so worried that if I do this, I will drop the ball. So I do have clients who are ADHD who I wouldn't consider them ball droppers, but they're more like they're so anxious and stressed and perfectionistic about making sure they don't, that it's really impacting their quality of life.
So those type A behaviors, right?
Yes.
Type A.
And most of the people I work with are very like type A, go-getter, goal-oriented, again, very creative, but we all need support. We all need that help. And, we're supposed to have these support systems. And that was, when I first started doing the podcast, it actually was called My Biz Bestie. And then I rebranded, but it was about, I wanted to help entrepreneurs create those like business support systems, because as a therapist, like we need that. We can't just think it all has to rely on us, but it is really hard because there's a lot of shame involved, and I would have it from either people I hired or friends, where I would say, I'm kind of an open book, maybe too much. And I would say, oh, I did this. And they're like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. And I'm like, really? I can't. Like, of course I get that, especially when it was something legal or something where I messed up, or can I just tell you how many people, I had somebody share in the group, they were like a new member, and they said they were really shameful about not having done their taxes yet. And I was like, girl, the extension deadline has not hit. And then we went around, and how many people in that group, just in that small group, were like, I'm still doing mine this week as well. Right. Like,
Right.
so there's those things where we feel so much shame about them. And again, like I used to feel so bad about it and get really defensive. And now it's almost like, meh, it is what it is. Like that. I did that. I dropped the ball. Now, how do I figure it out and move forward? Like, how do I, what's the next step? Because those things happen,
Well, and, I think there are going to be plenty of people listening that don't have ADHD that are still going to relate to those experiences of dropping the ball. Like it's a human experience, and that's not it's not to, undervalue the impact that it has for folks that do have ADHD or are struggling with feeling that way. My question is, how did ADHD become the focus for you in your own work, in your own right? Because it sounds like what happened, I mean, at least from what I gathered before, that you ended up having a lot of people in your therapy practice that, you recognized as having ADHD. And now you've created this whole essentially business and support system for folks that are entrepreneurs that have ADHD or are ADHD-ish. How did you choose? At what point do you recognize making the decision like, oh yeah, this is it. This is right. This is who I'm here to help and who I'm going to build resources for. Where was that point?
Yeah, I would say it was almost kind of recent-ish. So in seeing couples and after getting diagnosed and really delving into how like adult ADHD looks different and learning so much about that, as a couples counselor, and again, the average couple, when one or more of the people in the couple have ADHD, they will go on average to 6 therapists before it's recognized that the person has ADHD. And this causes a lot of problems because there are times when, like, if you followed like a traditional way of like, oh, you need to do this and that, you can be asking someone to commit to and do something that they are just not capable in that way. Right. And it looks like to the partner, like, oh, you just don't care about me. I'm not a priority. And so all of this stuff comes up and it creates all this conflict. So I think like delving really deep into it was really trying to help the couples that I serve, because I see the pain, like the shame and the pain of it, and how much, like at the heart of it, not everybody belongs together. Right. But I really try, like when you, especially if you have kids or if you have this great relationship, but this thing keeps getting in the way, like I want people to succeed. I want them to have healthier relationships. And so understanding ADHD was really important. And when I would do like, business, like coaching, consulting, I had a lot of resistance to the word coach, but part of me is like, get out of your own way and just like make peace with it. Cause it's like, then we know what that means, right?
You're not alone. I've spoken to that word is, I know.
Oh my gosh. I fought it for so long. So I kept saying lifestyle strategist. And I was like, sometimes you just get so obtuse. Like people are like, what the hell is that? I don't even know. But so then I started doing that. And even then, like people would say, oh, this should be your focus. I'm like, no, because I love working with all kinds of business owners. And the problem is, like I said earlier, most people don't recognize that that's what they're dealing with. And there is a lot of, like with ADHD, the other kind of telltale signs there, as human beings, we have like optimism bias that can impact our ability to get things done. Like we're overly optimistic about what we can accomplish in a certain period of time.
Well, that's me 100%.
Yeah. That's all humans. That is a brain bias that we all have. Right.
Got it.
But you add in that, and then this like time blindness where all of a sudden like time slips away from you, and there's the executive functioning part of ADHD where it's hard to plan. Like it doesn't mean you can't be a good planner. Like I'm super type A planner, list person, have all the spreadsheets, but at the same time, there also can be this logistical part that can kind of like short circuit. So there's all of this stuff that can get in the way. So I was like, they don't recognize that that's the issue. But then I kept like hearing people like have experiences with other coaches, or like somebody was like a productivity expert and they're saying like, this is what you should do. And then they're like, well, and if once it's painful enough, you'll make a change. And I was like, that's not how it works, because it is really painful. Like the mistakes I make are super painful, but my brain works different. So I can't just say I have to fit this, square peg in this round hole. I've got to figure out how to make, a different sized hole. Like I need to figure out a different strategy for it. And so I think it more and more, and then I realized like, well, first of all, I love my people. We're very creative. We're usually fun loving and talkative and just such cool people. And so I'm like, I just really love supporting them. So I had a lot of resistance though, not because I don't love working with that segment, but feeling like they might not even see that that's the issue. Right. But more and more like that was where I had created this membership 5 years ago, like, cause I got something in my brain and actually it was 6 years ago now. And I got this thing in my brain. And then of course I hyper focused and in a whole afternoon planned everything out, every detail. And then I put it on a shelf and didn't do it until last year. Finally, during the pandemic, I think I was like, enough is enough. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was one of those journeys where there was like pushback and like questioning. And yet I'm like, I know this is my thing. I just love, like your son, when you're interested in something, it's just so easy. Yeah. And you just talk about it all day. And I don't know, it's just something I'm into. So, but I love supporting people and understanding and kind of working through the shame, because there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of heartache that comes, with the negative sides.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of shame there's lots of shame to go around. Let's just be clear that we live in a culture that shames. Yes. There's a lot of shame to go around for us all, whether it's body image, whether it's, the good enough kind of shame, because I think so many people, and especially the path to entrepreneurship on its own, even without layering on ADHD, there's so much shame, right? Of like, can I build the thing that I want to build? Am I smart enough? Why can that person do it and I'm not doing it? Right? The conversations that are happening inside of people that don't see the light of day. I think there's a lot of that. And then you look at the way that money plays into our business conversations, our conversations around self-worth, right? And just the way that money is discussed and dealt with generally in our society. I think there's a lot of shame around that conversation because there's a lot of identity tied up in money and conversations around money that doesn't belong there, right? So there's so much of this. And then you layer on ADHD on top of, I just can't even imagine the amounts of shame that are flowing, right?
Yes.
It's real.
And like you said, the money thing. And for me, I've told people, I think I've made every single money mistake out there that you could possibly make. I tend to be, this is the impulsive part. Like on one hand, I take risks and I invest in myself. On the other hand, I can be super impulsive and just like, I've signed up for like $2,000 programs because I wanted to see the freebie behind the scenes thing. And I bet you there are times like where I never even watched that damn thing after I bought it, like stupid shit like that, where you're like, come on. Or I failed to pay my taxes in time and had to pay a fee, a penalty,
Yep.
Just like things like that where, I've literally made every single mistake. So yeah, money mindset is something I'm always talking about and thinking about and always working on, because I still have that. I think it's like, what do they say? A new level, old devil. Like you start working through things and you grow your business, but then old stuff can kind of pop back up. Yeah. Those old narratives pop back up. But it is hard. And money is another one where, again, inherently we're supposed to be so savvy around money to be a good entrepreneur, quote unquote. I'm doing it on video. Right. I realize air quotes. But at the same time, it's like money is an emotional issue. Like it's not usually the numbers. You can add, you can subtract, but there's a lot, like you said, of emotional content that gets triggered and like wrapped up in money and how we approach it and all of that. And so it's really, really hard. And then if you add in any ability of, or any part of impulsiveness, or, like you said, I just need this off my plate because I can't stand it anymore. And you hire somebody without following through, managing them, any of that stuff. And then it just ends up, kind of screwing you and putting you in a worse position. So there's so many ways that it can impact, like you said, in addition to the challenges that I think are already there.
Well, and one of the ironies, especially about the money conversation, is that it's like the one thing that is not taught anywhere in our entire educational experience, right? Like literally nobody graduates to adulthood truly understanding money unless they had some young experience with having to manage their own, or, like real life experience. It's a challenging thing to get. And most parents are not doing an adequate job educating their little people financially, or about the real world of money. And
Exactly.
it's like the struggle perpetuates, right? So anyways, we could go like a mile deep into that.
I know. I feel the same way. I have a little soapbox about that too. So yeah, I agree though. Like that's the thing. And yet we're supposed to just know these things, right? Or, if you read this book, like you should then be the expert. It's like, no, that's not how it works.
So with the kind of, with the clients and the folks that you're supporting, is it about distractibility? Is it about the fact that it's just more challenging to prioritize? Like, how do you define, kind of the struggle? Because I think all of us know what distraction feels like, especially, pandemic life. Is it that that's a bigger struggle? Is it that just the challenge that everybody has of prioritizing certain things in their business just becomes way harder? How would you describe that?
Yeah. I would say obviously there are individual nuances, but on the whole, definitely prioritizing is one of those very tough things. And that goes back to that executive functioning.
Yeah.
And so some of it is not having a plan, not even being able to focus long enough to make a plan, and then just feeling like, then we just do what we feel like doing. So I always say, when you menu plan for the week,
it's time for Cheetos.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, when I menu planned, it was like, I'm like, I don't really want that, but that was what Thursday night was. So I cook it and it's done, or, whatever. But if I don't, I'm going to probably, and I did do this during the pandemic, eat pizza and burgers every freaking night. So, if we don't menu plan, we're going to go on our whims, and you are never going to prioritize those things in your business that are challenging for you or trigger you or are like, oh my God, I have to do this. We make them so much bigger than they are. So I do think that is a big piece of it, that prioritization. I have a framework that I work from. It's ADD. So it's assess, discern, and then develop the plan. So it's, but then there's these things where people will say, I know this is just the one thing I need to do. And there's this emotional resistance to it, and they feel all this shame and they feel so bad. And I was like, I get it. I've been there. These people have been there, that are in the membership, or, if it happens to be one of those calls, but I understand, it should be simple. I always say one of my places is getting to the post office. I love buying presents for people. I can get it to a place where I will buy it months in advance. Inevitably, everything is sent late. Not because I don't have it or didn't think of them, but there's some kind of weird, I don't know, vortex between me and the post office in getting things out. Right. And so it's understanding those things, because other people will be like, oh my God, Amber, just go to the post office. Go right now. Oh, okay. But if you said that to me and I had free space, I would just go to the post office right then. Sometimes it is just moving away all the clutter and saying, okay, yes, I'm doing this right now. So I do think at the core, a lot of it is prioritization, but also overwhelming ourselves, overwhelming our schedules. And that's something I talk about a lot, is we overcommit. And especially as I think women and mothers, the overcommitting to everybody, we're overscheduled, we're overloaded. And then we think, oh, I should be able to discern the perfect priority every single day. And it's no, that's not how it works.
Even on a good day, some days that's not
you
how
might have
works.
A random good day where you're like, I chose the right thing. Woohoo!
Right. Yeah, like the lottery wheel. I know. So how do people declutter that, especially if they have a hard time with prioritization?
I like to start. So I'm kind of one of those people, I like to start big picture and then kind of narrow down. So the things that I like when I start with people are usually around their schedule and their commitments, right? So I start with that. But then I also talk about then it's the daily to-dos, or I say like, what's on your plate as far as, like, what are your, like knowing exactly what you need to do each day. And I resisted this for years, but I'm a avid believer in your one thing, like the one thing. And I teach like quarterly goal planning workshops kind of from that premise of it's really important. So if you have 10 things on your to-do list and then you get 3 done, you feel crappy because you didn't get done what you felt you quote unquote needed to get done. But if you put the 3 top, I usually say 1 top priority, but you can have 3 at the most of like 2 other things that would be great if you could. And you put those on your list and you're very realistic about what you expect yourself to get done in that day. When you achieve those, you feel fantastic. And that creates a behavioral momentum that actually means the next day you're more likely to get those things done again. And it comes back to, I think when you break it down really small, I always like to know, like write that list the day before. Cause again, the same thing, you'll waste hours in the morning trying to write that list. And whenever I've written that list in the morning, it ends up being super long. And I'm like, I know better. No, come on. But when you're in that space, you're almost like stress, like writing or something. So,
I think it's brain dump. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. The brain dump. So it's like getting clarity. And so schedule then like what you expect. So managing your expectations in a day, because when you do that, and when I find people do that, and I also am a huge fan of like, time blocking and, like, so you're not task switching, right. Or context switching. And so you're staying in that one zone because that's capitalizing on the hyper focus thing that we can do as ADHD. Like, let's stay in this zone, because if I'm asking you to do something in a different zone, it just kind of disrupts everything. So I think those are kind of like my top strategies, but I always kind of go big picture, narrow. But if you are overcommitted and overwhelmed, it is almost impossible to make those prioritizations, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I feel it. I mean, like you say, especially wearing multiple roles, mom role, pandemic role is still a little weird, even with kids right now back in school, because it's like my schedule still is, I have late drop off for both kids. They start later than most other schools. And then I'm also picking them up for lunch still, because I don't want them unmasking around other kids. They're too little to be vaccinated. Right. And so it's like my schedule is still super wonky, where there is still more context switching than I would like, and lots of running around and all of this stuff. But it's like I'm at least getting a couple hours back at a time where I feel like I can get like 1 or 2 things done. But what you're talking about, like going, starting wide and then going narrow, you're absolutely right that you have to be that focused in order to get something done. Because if you have all these things on your plate, I mean, and I'm the queen of like super long lists of like, here's the 89 things I need to finish this week.
Exactly. But then like break that out through the week. That's the thing. This is kind of my other soapbox, where I'm like, our bandwidth is not the same still. Right. And so so this is where, like I say, we always have to take into consideration what's going on in our life. Some people are dealing with losses or divorces or illnesses or whatever. So that's in addition to this limited bandwidth. So expect less of yourself, and it actually creates more productivity, ironically. Right. But we are still in COVID. And this is where I see this year, especially last year, people gave each other a lot of grace and consideration, and they gave themselves that. This year, it's like, no, what's wrong with me? And like back in COVID, I was like, back in COVID? I was like, we're still in COVID, friends. But all of a sudden we think, oh, I should have. And I had a friend who say that she has ADHD, and she's like, well, they should have figured it out by now. And I was like, no, like we're still dealing with this. And case in point, I shared with you, I just got over COVID. I'm vaccinated, everything. And I got COVID, and then my oldest got it for sure. And so my kids have been home all week, which has been insane and like really hard. And so it's like, we can't stop thinking that somehow you're back to quote unquote normal, because that's not true. But like you said, now it's not even back to the old normal, but you have a little time. So you feel this pressure, but then you have to get even more like, I can do one thing today. If I only do one thing, what will it be? And then you feel good about that. And then you can have those things that are like gravy, cherry on top things, but don't don't pretend. Like I've done that too. Like, oh no, I'll be fine with just this one thing, but really in my mind, but I'm like, but you need to do all 5, like do those 5 things. And it's like, no pretending, for reals, expect that one thing. And then you feel so much more relaxed and it gives you more energy, and the stress takes up a lot of energy. So for me, it's about energy management.
No, and you bring some important context back into this about, first of all, COVID not being over, and the fact that for so many people that I know, 2021 has actually been harder on them than 2020. And I think it is a lot of actually what you just spoke about, that we have this expectation that like we should have figured it out. And I think many of us, myself included, rounded the corner into 2021 thinking like, okay, we're going to reach some like, semblance of normal, not pre-COVID normal. I'm clear that we don't need to go back to that place. Right. But thinking like, okay, that's fine. We're going to get there. And then still having 2021 be really hard for other reasons. Right. And so many that we still can't control. But yes, I think, we need to continue to have grace and be gentle with ourselves and with others. And that to me is also still a silver lining that has come from COVID, is that like, whether you wanted it or not, it's had to, like I think in so many ways, we all have been forced to insert an element of humanity back into our understanding and our bigger picture concept of what other people might be going through, because so many people are going through a lot.
Yes. And I, like you said, I'm seeing the impact of that chronic stress, or or being forced to deal with things in this overwhelming situation. And now it's bubbling up in 2021 more. Like I see it in my business. I've seen it, in so many of the people I'm working with. And that's the thing. It's taking a toll, and we're not in a normal place. And where else do you say, I have to go pick up my kid because I'm afraid they're going to get they could potentially get this disease and die, so I got to pick them up so they don't eat without a mask. I mean, that's a freaking stressor. That's huge. Right. And, if it was something else where it'd be like, oh, it'd be nice to do this or pick up my kids or do that you can say, oh, I'm prioritizing, I'll let that go. But when the motivation for that is what you're talking about, you're not going to make an exception there. Right. So you feel like you have to do that, and that's fine, but you can't expect yourself to be running at 100%. And still manage everything. So
that's right. Yeah, no, it's so true. So I want to ask you a little bit. And first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that you said, you personally kind of hit a wall in a phase of burnout, and it involved an accident involving your son. I'm so sorry to hear that. That as a parent just like makes my whole body like shrink up. How do you cope? Because I think there are still a lot of people that are reaching burnout or have reached it multiple times throughout this period of COVID, and trying to, and for folks that have had to like establish whole new businesses or whole new directions that they're pursuing. And there's plenty of those folks. How do you walk people through this process of recognizing burnout, of dealing with it the right way? Is there a way to get through that better than others?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a process. Like you didn't get to burnout overnight, and it does take time. So it's definitely a process. And yeah, sometimes people don't even recognize that that's what's going on, or they're so in survival mode that they'll tell you like the 15 things that are stressing them out on their plate. And they're like, but I just have to do it. Like there's no other option, Yeah. And right now, because of COVID, there's also like less access to childcare or that you feel comfortable with. There's also like that, like if you have family members that need to be taken care of, or, had extra support, there's that worry about them, or needing to help people who didn't normally need help prior, but now they're needing extra support, and, and then the isolation. There's just so much that leads to that. So sometimes it's even understanding. And I know the first time, my first bout of burnout that I would say, when I finally realized it, it took me a while, because you always hear like compassion fatigue, or like you start to resent your clients or doing the work. And I kept going like, I love working with my clients. And this was back when I was just doing therapy clients. And I I was like, I just love working with them. And that's the one time I really show up and shine. Like I never miss an appointment, like probably way too much. Like there were times I probably should have canceled, but like because my back was out or something, I always show up and I thought, oh, well, I'm still enjoying that work. So I must not be burnt out. And then not realizing though, I basically let like the administrative side like run to crap until I hired the right people. Right. Or I started feeling tons of resentment in my personal life, like feeling like insanely irate with my husband over things, or feeling like, which some of it was deserved, I will say, but I'm just kidding. Some of it, I mean, come on, but 24 years together, some of it's irritating. Right. Or like I started actually feeling even resentful towards employees. Like, God, can't you just like, why did you mess this up? Like, yeah. And mine shows up much more in the employee thing, which I've had a lot of awareness of why that comes out. And that's, I think the second biggest struggle I hear from entrepreneurs is about hiring and like that whole process, that struggle of finding the right people. But it's like, I felt like, oh, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? And they kept making mistakes, which is human, but my compassion for that was very low. Like my tolerance. I mean, I would show up and do the right thing that you're supposed to say, but internally I would feel rageful. Like I was like, oh my God, you're such a drain, like I would feel that. And so, yeah, I think it can show up in different ways. And, I know we're about out of time, but I was like, there is definitely a process to go through and like overcoming burnout. And sometimes it is making hard choices and saying like, I've either got to figure out a different way to address this thing that needs to be taken care of, or I've got to temporarily like, let it go. Like my favorite thing to say is like, let's put a pin in it. So, because if I tell you, you can't do something, which, I don't tell people what to do, but you can't do something. Or if I tell you, you need to let that go, you're going to want to hold on to it. Most likely. Most adults don't like to be told that.
Right.
But if I say, let's just put a pin in it for 6 months and then revisit it, most of those pins you don't revisit and you actually let it go, but you felt this obligation or, you felt like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to let it go. There was some resistance to it. So that's actually one of my favorite strategies, but I think simplify. Yeah. Simplify.
Yeah. Well, it's, I feel like, I think I personally hit 2 major phases of burnout, different points since COVID started. And the first time it was kind of like, okay, is this burnout? And the second time it was like, is this burnout or like major depression? It was really a lot heavier than the first burnout. I think they were both burnout related and other compounding factors, but it's, and especially if you're a person that is generally optimistic, generally like you've gone along just kind of plugging through, pushing through, and you haven't really had too many experiences like that before, it can be a hard thing, I think, to recognize. And so I just, I think it's really important to talk about. And, I appreciate the fact that, you shared about reaching burnout yourself. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more people are willing to look at what they're going through a little bit more objectively and ask more questions around it and not just put on this masking language of like, well, like the example you gave, well, I've got these things to do, and this is how I feel about it, but I just have to keep going. I just have to push through. And it's like, no, I think that.
And at a certain point, your body, you won't let you, right? Like things are going to happen, like illnesses, you can, like illnesses start showing up. I don't want to say manifest like you cause them, but like things start to show up and like extreme exhaustion and depression, like chronic burnout. Of course, you're going to feel depressed. Like you don't feel like you can do what you used to. You can feel like a failure. And yeah, it's hard. And even, I had training in this. I help people with this as a therapist, but even me, like I said, I didn't recognize it. And then I tried to buy my way out of burnout, which only exacerbated it. Like it didn't actually solve the problem. So I just continued to try things that didn't, cause at the time, again, I wasn't willing, like, I was like, no, I need to have this fun thing. This was the membership, which I love. But after my son's accident, I was like, I need something where I get to connect with people and it's fun and we can talk about serious things, but where it's not just trauma, and I can have fun and talk business and like have it be a very different experience. But yeah, you know, how you approach that is a big part of it.
Right. Well, I think it's so cool that you've created a space where people can talk openly about this kind of stuff being part of the path of entrepreneurship, and also specifically, you know, deal with or just, you know, discuss and learn about ADHD and its impact, or ADHD-ish type of symptoms or behaviors or whatever, because I think that, you know, we've all been distractible at times. We've all been challenged when it comes to prioritizing things properly, right? All of that. So what in the kind of the new area of work with this online membership, right? And taking a portion of your business online, what's your favorite thing about that?
Oh, I have a lot of things. I'm trying to think, I guess what's coming up for me, because there really are quite a few. I think what I noticed in that this summer, one of the best things is the flexibility, because like I said, as a therapist, like I meet with people every week at the same time every week, and I see people long-term, like, you know, some people come in and out, but I've had clients that I've had on and off for like 10 years. So like I make a commitment, right? But with that, it can be really hard to take vacations and have time off. So there's all this flexibility. And now, like now that I do it remotely, which before it was all in person, right? Now that I do it remotely, like I can travel and do things and still do my work and like focus that. Or because of, you know, how I'm working with people, there's just more flexibility. And I think having that allows me, because I'm not great at balance. I'm a very all or nothing person who is working towards a middle ground. But my natural rhythm is all or nothing. Like literally, there is no in between, but some things I'm getting there. And I think that that flexibility of being online lends to getting to that middle ground more.
Yeah. One of the silver linings, right? Of the pandemic. Yeah. I think a lot of people are reevaluating how they can show up and do their work in new ways. And I mean, even my husband, who's not an entrepreneur, but like the way they do meetings has totally changed. And it's like, I would be so shocked to see any even company go back, quote unquote, to pre-pandemic, you know, normal type of scheduling. Like, why would you do that? Now that we have this new level of flexibility. And it's like, you know, even for people that maybe at one point had to travel or do other things for work commitments, and now they are able to achieve much more balance in the way that they schedule their days. That, you know, anyways, I think there are some silver linings, and hopefully we can hang on to those. I know, and I want to be respectful of time as well. I feel like this topic, my goodness, we could just keep going on it.
We might need to do a part 2 sometime.
Totally. We can totally do a part 2.
Hashtag burnout. Well, the part 2 will be burnout.
Oh my gosh. I know. Well, and you know, here's the thing is burnout is still going to happen even post-pandemic, whenever we're through, right? The heat of whatever is continuing and whatever is going to come to an end. There's still going to be burnout. There's still going to be things that cause us to hit walls and face challenges, and, you know, things that we need to recognize around that. I love, you've got a gift, and it's called Self-Care for When Life is a Shit Show. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? So that
Yes, that is very much my humor and my style. I'm very direct. I say I'm the queen of carefrontation. So
the queen of what?
Carefrontations, like caring confrontations. Like we need, like, let's get real. Let's talk about
intervention,
this.
Right?
Exactly.
Yes.
But they know it's coming from such a not judgmental space.
Right.
So, so this is something that I've used with like clients throughout the years in therapy, even, and it's kind of like creating that list of coping strategies or things that help you either de-stress or bring you joy. And sometimes you need that list like visible, because when you're in it, you can't always think of it unless somebody says to you, hey, why don't you go do XYZ or go outside for a walk or, take a hike or whatever the thing is. I was like,
take a hike.
But,
Wait, that sounded
take a
wrong.
hike, lady.
No, like take a good hike. Yeah.
And so I, created this thing where it's like, here are some strategies that take, like 1 minute, 5 minutes. Here's things that you need like 30 minutes to do or an hour or like, so it's about having like figuring out, okay, I have a few minutes or I have 30 minutes and what can I do to like make myself feel better, to reduce my stress, because stress, we're just filled with stress in our modern life. And so it's about incrementally like bringing it down below the threshold where it feels manageable. Right. And so those small things, and, some of it might be that bubble bath or whatever, whatever that thing is. But it doesn't all have to be like that. Like it's customized. So I give some suggestions, but I allow you the space to kind of write your own list. So you have that. So when life is a shit show, you can take a look and say, okay, is there something on here that I can do? Will it change the reality of the shitty thing happening? No, but it'll help you cope a little bit.
Right. Help you get through it. Totally. Well, it's funny. And I've said this before, but like essential oils, like if you're talking about like 1 minute self-care, right?
Yes.
There's an essential oil called Motivate by doTERRA that I think is like orange and maybe, I don't know, a little vanilla. It's citrusy, but it is like, it's a little bit like drinking a cup of coffee for me. I can be like, ooh, okay. I have to push through another, half hour, an hour. Like I can do this. And it's like layering enough of those in. I feel like they make a difference. They do. They make a difference. Yeah.
And that's, because sometimes you need to rest. Sometimes you need to rally. So what do you do to take care of yourself?
Yeah. No, it's so true. So for folks that are listening, you can check out her self-care gift. I love that. It's relevant for all of us. Hop over to the show notes page at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Amber, where do you show up online? I'm going to share your other link. So run us through where you show up online and where you'd like for people to connect with you.
Yes. Well, I see, this is one of those things like during this pandemic, I was like, I got to put some pins and stuff. So I've been narrowing and being realistic about where I spend time because I can go down like a TikTok spiral like anybody else. I would say on Instagram, it's Amber Hawley on Instagram. So I'm definitely there, on LinkedIn as well. I'm trying to be more consistent there because that is, I see the value in it. So I am there.
I can hear you talking yourself into it.
I know. I was like, I really am. I guess this is going to make me that 40-something-year-old woman where I'm like, I really am on Facebook a lot because that's already where all my people are.
Oh my gosh.
Even though I know everyone's like so over Facebook, I'm like, I'm on Facebook a lot because that's how I connect with my family because no one lives near us. And so, and all my friends and all the groups I'm in. So I do love Facebook. I'm always reluctant to share it because I know people have so many feelings.
Right. It's the disclaimer, right? I'm on Facebook. However, I do not support I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. But yeah, you can always, hit me up there and, or message me in Instagram or Facebook, if you have questions or want to connect, but I would say the podcast is probably the other place.
Awesome. And is that just on your website, amberhawley.com?
Yes, amberhawley.com, but it's on any podcast player, like all the podcast players.
They could go find it. Yeah. I'm just thinking if somebody wanted to catch your home base and get access to more information about you there. And Hawley, just if you're listening, is Hawley. Amber, so great to connect with you today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you better and hearing about how you support entrepreneurs and folks in the space that I serve, especially with challenges around, ADHD, prioritizing, burnout, etc. It's really, really important topic. What final takeaway or piece of advice do you want to leave people with today?
I think, hopefully hearing this, whether or not because I have people ask this, like, I think I have ADHD, like, should I go get an evaluation? Like that kind of thing. I always say, it can be helpful. Sometimes for me, it was very helpful to have the diagnosis because then I understood like where these behaviors were coming from. And it allowed me to like, again, stop thinking I was just my shitty personality parts, but figuring out like different strategies, and so I was able to have a lot more compassion for myself. And I say, if the diagnosis will help you in that way, or if you're considering medication, not everybody does medication. It's really, depends on the situation. Then I think it can be valuable. But if you're like, I'm on the fence and I don't really know, there are some, free online quizzes that you can take. I like Dr. Amen. He has 7 different types that he talks about. You can always do that to find out for yourself. But I'd say at the very least, like understanding the different strategies, because even if you're like, so if you have neurodiversity, like if you're not, neurotypical, if you are neurotypical and then you like look at these strategies that help people that have ADHD, they're going to help you. I think the inverse is not always true is the problem is like the normal quote unquote ways of doing things don't always work for anybody who has any type of neurodiversity, whether that's ADHD or autism or any other kinds of things that kind of are uncategorized where your brain works a little different. But I would say even if, like look at those strategies and see if they help you. And, regardless, you might not care. You might be like, I'm 47. I don't really care. It's not impacting me. Like maybe I could learn a few things, but I would say that's maybe my biggest takeaway because that's a common question I get.
No, I love it. It's super important and people being able to make a meaningful choice. I mean, I just spoke with somebody in one of my entrepreneur masterminds, actually, a couple of weeks ago. We connected for the first time. It took us like 6 months. And he had recently learned as an adult that he was ADHD. And it was only because his wife figured out she was ADHD.
Exactly.
And it opened up this whole conversation. And I asked him, I said, was it helpful for you to sort that out? And he was like, so helpful. And I said, what ways did it help? And he's like, it just, put things into a context that helped me understand why certain things were really hard, felt harder for me than just other people, and so, if it helps people, I agree. I think it's worth it. And there are enough resources now. I mean, as a parent of a neurodiverse child, right? I mean, obviously with children nowadays, it's like, I want to do anything I can to help my kiddo get the support because he has actually both an autism and an ADHD diagnosis, get the early support that might help him have a stronger foundation in school or learning or whatever it is that he wants to do. But, it can't hurt you to have the education and additional resources. And then as an adult, obviously you get to test out, do they feel supportive? Do they feel like they work for you? Right. Is it a strategy that you can adapt and use? Amber, so great to connect with you. I so appreciate your time today. I do hope that we get to part 2 and I hope that it's sooner than later. And I hope that we also get to say that it's post-pandemic. Those are my wishes.
I look forward to that as well.
Awesome. Thank you.